What if the ancient world held the secret to predicting earthquakes, floods, and storms? Is it possible that the wisdom of old cultures could reveal a power that modern science can't fully understand? We live in an age of incredible technology, with satellites and supercomputers designed to warn us of impending danger. Yet, every year, natural disasters strike with devastating force, often catching us by surprise. But what if the key to anticipating these events wasn't hidden in complex algorithms, but in the earth, the sky, and the animals around us? What if our ancestors knew how to listen to the planet in ways we've long forgotten? For centuries, ancient civilizations didn't have Doppler radar or seismographs. Instead, they relied on something much closer to home, the world around them. They observed subtle signs in nature, using the earth, animals, and the stars to forecast the future. In ancient Egypt, life revolved around the Nile River. By carefully tracking its water levels and the behavior of the river, they could predict the annual floods with remarkable accuracy. This wasn't just about avoiding disaster. It was the foundation of their entire agricultural system, determining when to plant and when to harvest. Further north, the Greeks believed that earthquakes were a sign of the sea god Poseidon's fury, a divine warning. The Romans, practical as they were, looked for more earthly signs. They believed that unusual bird behavior, like flocks suddenly changing their flight patterns, was an omen of approaching storms. In ancient China, meteorologists of a different kind watched the winds and the color of the sky. They developed intricate systems to interpret these signs, believing they could predict not just rain but devastating floods and droughts. These weren't just superstitions, they were sophisticated systems of observation, honed over generations. But perhaps the most intriguing system of all was their attention to animals. What if animals knew something we didn't? Ancient people firmly believed that animals could sense danger long before any human could. There are countless historical accounts and legends of animals acting strangely just before major disasters. Dogs howling inconsolably for hours before an earthquake shakes the ground. Birds falling silent or flying erratically in the moments before a powerful storm. Snakes and rodents emerging from their burrows in the middle of winter, as if fleeing an unseen threat. Indigenous peoples across North America, who lived in deep connection with their environment, paid close attention to these shifts in animal behavior. A change in the migration pattern of caribou or the unusual absence of fish in a river could be interpreted as an early warning sign of a harsh winter or a coming drought. They saw these creatures not just as part of the landscape, but as messengers. But did these animals truly possess a sixth sense? Or was there something deeper in the way they interacted with nature, something our modern senses can no longer detect? Beyond the earth, ancient cultures looked to the heavens for answers. The stars above, they believed, held the secrets to the world below. Ancient Mayan and Babylonian astronomers were master observers of the cosmos. They meticulously tracked the movements of planets, stars, and the moon. They didn't just see celestial bodies, they saw a cosmic clock. And they believed its movements were linked to events on Earth, comets streaking across the night sky. Solar and lunar eclipses, or unusual planetary alignments, were not just beautiful spectacles. They were interpreted as powerful omens, often signaling impending natural catastrophes like famines, floods, or the fall of kings in China. The zodiac was more than just a tool for telling fortunes. It was deeply connected to the cycles of the moon and the seasons. Priests and scholars used these complex celestial patterns to predict agricultural outcomes, forecasting periods of flood and drought based on the movements of the stars. It was a fusion of astronomy, astrology, and environmental science, where the fate of the empire could be read in the night sky. For these cultures, the universe was not a random collection of stars, but a living, interconnected system, where the macrocosm of the heavens directly influenced the microcosm of life on Earth. But what about the ground shaking beneath their feet? Could the Earth itself be trying to speak to us? Some ancient cultures believed it was. In Japan, a land all too familiar with seismic activity, volcanoes and earthquakes were seen as powerful messages from the divine. The eruption of Mount Fuji, for example, was considered a profound spiritual event. Over centuries, the Japanese developed a keen awareness of their environment, noticing subtle changes that often preceded major tremors. They learned to interpret the patterns of smaller quakes, believing they could forecast larger, more destructive ones. In the Roman Empire, people living near Mount Vesuvius noticed strange signs for years before its catastrophic eruption in 79 AD. The ground would tremble, wells would dry up, and a strange haze would hang in the air. While they didn't have the geological knowledge we do today, they interpreted these geological shifts as signs of the Earth's unrest. They saw it as the land itself warning them of what was to come. These weren't just random occurrences. They were pieces of a puzzle, a language of the earth that they were desperately trying to understand. In an age where survival was so uncertain, every sign, every omen, could mean the difference between life and death. Faced with the awesome power of nature, many ancient cultures believed that human action was required to maintain balance. The Aztecs, for example, believed that the gods needed to be appeased to prevent the world from ending in a cataclysmic disaster. They performed elaborate, and often brutal, rituals and sacrifices, believing that these offerings could calm angry deities and stave off earthquakes, floods, or droughts. These practices weren't born from cruelty, but from a place of profound fear and a sense of responsibility. They saw themselves as active participants in the cosmic order. Dances, prayers, and offerings were all part of a desperate bargain with the forces that controlled their world. The stakes were impossibly high. They believed that failing to please the gods could trigger the very disasters they feared most. It was a world where human survival felt like it was hanging by a thread, dependent on their ability to correctly interpret and respond to the will of the divine. But what happened when their predictions failed, or when the disaster was simply too big to overcome? Did ancient people predict the end of their own worlds, or were they blindsided by forces they couldn't possibly comprehend? We look at the ruins of great civilizations like the Maya in Central America or the ancestral Pueblones in the American Southwest, and we wonder what happened. Archaeological evidence suggests that both of these societies faced severe, prolonged environmental disasters, like extreme droughts, that led to their collapse. Did their shamans and astronomers see it coming? Did their readings of the stars and the earth warn them of a future without rain? Perhaps they did, but the warnings were ignored by their leaders. Or maybe the scale of the catastrophe was simply beyond anything they had ever experienced or could have imagined. These silent ruins are a haunting reminder that even the most sophisticated ancient prediction systems had their limits. They challenge us to reflect on whether deep knowledge of the environment is enough when faced with irreversible change. But what if these ancient predictions weren't as mystical as they seem? What if they were actually early forms of science? As it turns out, many of these ancient methods were based on sharp, empirical observations of nature patterns that modern science has since confirmed. Take animal behavior, for instance. Scientists now theorize that some animals may be sensitive to subtle changes in the environment that precede earthquakes, like shifts in the Earth's magnetic field or the release of underground gases. They aren't psychic. They're just picking up on physical cues that are imperceptible to humans. Ancient knowledge of weather patterns, like the Egyptians' understanding of the Nile's flood cycle or the Chinese observations of cloud formations, was essentially an early form of meteorology. Their knowledge of geology was also surprisingly advanced. By noting small tremors or changes in volcanic vents, ancient peoples were practicing a rudimentary form of seismology and volcanology. They may have attributed these events to the gods, but their underlying observations were often scientifically sound. They were the world's first environmental scientists, gathering data over generations. This brings us to a fascinating and slightly unsettling question. Today, we have satellites that can see a hurricane forming from space and AI that can model earthquake probabilities. We are armed with an arsenal of high-tech solutions. But could we be overlooking the wisdom of the past in our relentless quest for technological advancement? How many early warnings do we miss because we are glued to screens instead of observing the world around us? We've become disconnected from the very environment our ancestors were so intimately attuned to. What if the answers to better disaster prediction don't just lie in more advanced technology, but in combining that technology with the methods the ancients used? What if we started paying attention to the subtle cues of nature again, the behavior of animals, the patterns in the sky, the whispers of the earth itself? Are we so confident in our modern systems that we become deaf to the planet's own warning signals? Ancient civilizations didn't just survive, they actively tried to predict the disasters that shaped their world. They read the stars, listened to the earth, and watched the animals, creating a rich tapestry of knowledge that allowed them to navigate a dangerous and unpredictable world. What can we learn from them? And more importantly, what might we be missing in our modern age? As we stand here, surrounded by our technological marvels, perhaps the greatest wisdom lies not in looking forward, but in looking back, and learning to listen to the planet once again. Thanks for watching.